Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Let's see if I'm loud enough here. Okay.
Shut these doors.
Welcome to the University YMCA. For those few of you that I don't know yet, my name is Ann Rasmus. I'm Associate Director here at the Y, and we're glad you're here today. Before we begin, staff wanted to take a moment today to acknowledge that on Monday evening, we lost an incredible leader and friend of the University YMCA. Steve Shoemaker truly embodied the values of kindness, humanity, service, and reflection, lifelong learning, and welcome to all perspectives as we explore what it means to live our lives individually and together in a meaningful way. Steve truly did live his life, and he always reminded us, those of us who were fortunate enough to know him and in his community that probably touches almost all of us, he always reminded us in any number of little ways to celebrate and to really cherish each of our lives. I'm going to ask that we just take a moment of silence together in remembrance and in gratitude for Steve's life with us. Thank you. Welcome to today's talk, which is a part of the Fall 2016 Friday Forum Lecture Series entitled On the Issues, Analyzing the 2016 Elections. I invite you all to take a look at the series brochures, which are sitting on your chairs, and to take one with you if you don't have one yet, as a reminder of the upcoming talks. We would like to thank our series co-sponsors for supporting this program. For a full list of sponsors, please see the series brochures, which are, again, on your seats, or to visit our website. Sign language interpreters are always available for any speaker in this series or any program at the Y. If you contact the Y before 3 o'clock p.m. on the Tuesday prior to a Friday lecture or the same amount of time before another program. Friday Forum is rebroadcast on WEFT, 90.1 Community Radio, Urbana Public Television, and in some cases also on YouTube. After today's presentation, we'll begin our question and answer period using a remote microphone to field questions. Please wait to ask your questions until you have been given the microphone, and if you need to leave during the presentation, feel free to slip out. The reason for the microphone is that we do record and we don't catch the questions if you don't speak into the mic. So I'll run around and get my exercise and bring in the microphone. If you are a student here for a class and you're here for credit, please sign in either on the welcome table out there, or we can also circulate a sheet. I would like to invite Rich Martin to come up and introduce today's speaker. Thanks.
Robert W. McChesney is the Gutzel Endowed Professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Illinois. In 2002, he was the co-founder of Free Press, the National Media Reform Organization. He served as its president until April 2008. He remains on the board of directors. Gutzel. Excuse me? Joined you, sorry. Okay. He also hosted the Media Matters weekly radio program every Sunday afternoon, WILL AM, between 2002 and 2012. From 1988 to 1998, he was on the journalism and mass communication faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He earned his PhD in communications at the University of Washington in 1989. His work concentrates on the history and political economy of communication, emphasizing the role media play in democratic and capitalistic societies. He co-edits with John Marone the History of Communication series from the University of Illinois Press. From 2000 to 2004, he served as co-editor of the Monthly Review, the independent socialist magazine founded by Paul Sweezy and Leo Huberman in 1949. He's written or edited 27 books. His most recent book is written with John Nichols, People Get Ready, The Fight Against the Jobless Economy and a Citizenless Democracy. McChesney.
Well, thank you all for coming. Thanks for the kind introduction, and thank you, Friday Forum, for asking me to participate in this series on the election of 2016. I see there are students apparently here who are supposed to be getting undergraduate credit. I guess we have some returning students then by that logic. We have a lot of people here who are seasoned, like myself. That's good to see. The question that the title of my talk is this the last election of the 20th century or the 21st century? The way what I meant by that is this election sort of an anomaly after which we go back to business as usual like we've had for the last 40 years of American presidential elections? Or is the sort of funkiness that we're all familiar with in 2015 and 2016 a harbinger of what's to come? And I won't keep you in suspense. I think it's a harbinger of what's to come. I think that's almost certainly where we're going. This is not a fluke year. This is not a year that sort of some goofy stuff happened out of blue and that will quickly fade into memory as sort of a one-off. But in fact, what we're seeing now take place in this election are long-term trends that have rapidly crystallized, and they're leading to fundamental shifts in U.S. politics. And that will eventually show up as it has already in U.S. elections. I'm trying to. Short of swallowing it, I don't know what more I can do. Can you hear me in the back? Okay. Maybe you should move to the back. That's how I want to tell someone to usually make people move closer. You got some. Yeah. This is my. Yeah, phone book. Maybe the phone book will work anymore. Anyway, I'll keep talking and I will talk louder as much as possible. You know, one thing I want to do in this talk is avoid dealing very much with Donald Trump's asininity, the stuff we're wallowing in, the stuff the news cycle is obsessed with. I think that it's entertaining to some, and certainly interesting and of value in the near term. But I think it causes us to lose sight of the bigger issues that are at stake that I'm really concerned with. All right. Oh, yeah, I can see the smiles instantly. I like that. Wow. Not my eyes going to see that far as the mic used to be. We'd be in really good shape. Again, at a point, most of you will understand the young ones will know idea what we're talking about. You will someday. So, you know, I want to discuss the presidential contest in this broader context of what I think is taking place. And as I do that, I want to start by making a couple of very important points. First of all, I'm not trying to be the new Nostradamus. I'm not going to be making any great predictions. In fact, I don't think it's possible to predict anything in the future. I mean, 18 months ago, if someone stood on this set at a Friday Forum and told you about Donald Trump, they would have been laughed out of the room as complete nincompoops. They know nothing. Yet the person who would have predicted what happened would be considered some great seer, the new Nostradamus. I'm not trying to imitate Nostradamus. I learned a lesson in humility 30 years ago that stayed with me, and I'll share it with you. In 1988, I was finishing my PhD at the University of Washington, and about to move to Madison for my first academic job. And I went in to see a member of my committee, a professor of mine who was a native South Africa, a white South African who had left South Africa in the 1960s, in part because of his opposition to apartheid. And his family all still lived in South Africa, and he was very closely connected to the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. Followed politics closely, that was his research area, South African politics. So he knew more about South Africa than anyone I knew, by a wide measure. And I went to see him say goodbye, and he was especially glum. I said, Tony, what's up? He's sitting in. And he said he'd just been in touch with all his friends and comrades in Cape Town in South Africa, and there had never been more pessimism among the anti-apartheid activists in the country in his lifetime. He's been around for decades. He said the Afrikaans government in power was refusing to negotiate. It was hopeless. There would be no justice for black South Africans ever unless there was enormous amounts of bloodshed that would make the country unlivable. He said he's never seen the mood so dark and dour among anti-apartheid activists. It really bothered him. This was in June, I think, of 1988. 2 years later, Nelson Mandela, after being robbed out of prison for 27 years, was released from prison, head of the ANC, the African National Congress. A few years after that, he was elected president of South Africa. In that intervening 5 or 6 years, there was less violence than you find in a Chicago bar fight on a Saturday night. So my friend, who was the most knowledgeable person I knew in South Africa, and all those most serious South African anti-apartheid activists, at the very eve of history changing 180 degrees, were completely wrong about what was going to happen in their own country, where they were total experts. They had no idea. They misread all the signals completely. And what that taught me, and should teach us all, is not to get too hung up with predictions of the future. We can't know what's going to happen. Stuff comes at us out of nowhere. The only thing to be certain is anyone who claims they know doesn't have a clue. Doesn't have a clue. So I say that to caution you because I think we're at a time now where no one can predict where we're going to go. I certainly wouldn't try. I think we're entering a period politically in the United States and in the world where things are going to be in great upheaval, much more so than they've been for the past few decades. That's the only thing I'm comfortable predicting. And that's sort of what I try to do in the new book that was generously referenced, People Get Ready, the fight against the jobless economy and citizenless democracy, which just came out a few months ago. And I co-authored it with my friend John Nichols. We've written several books together on a number of topics. And I'm going to tell you briefly what the argument of that book is, because it sort of underscores what I talk about in the rest of the talk today. Our argument is that capitalism in the United States has been in a long-term decline. Unemployment, underemployment have been increasing. Poverty has been increasing. That the signs for the future, by all accounts across the board in business analysts, are that the future is not going to be especially good for capitalism. We want slow growth, increasing inequality, increasing poverty. These trend lines are going to continue. Combined with that, we're at a wave right now, a burst in artificial intelligence and robotics is probably going to accentuate most of these tendencies. It's going to eliminate jobs, increase unemployment, and especially extend inequality as a result. And so we're going to enter a very dramatically different period than the one that most of the people in this room are used to living in this country. The one that our children, and some of the students of this university, are the first generation really immersed in this new world order of sort of the declining labor market and the declining future. And we argue when people get ready that the political system now is extraordinarily corrupt. I wouldn't say it's the most corrupt ever in American history. There's a lot of candidates for that honor. But it's certainly closer to being in the nominating circle than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. The role of money in politics. Our leading political scientists from most of our major universities now all independently come to the same conclusion. We actually study how decisions are made by the U.S. government, by state governments and local governments. This is not a democracy. The interests, values, concerns of the general population have absolutely no bearing whatsoever on what our government does. It responds in toto to wealth and privilege and money and interest. They dominate the governing process. So our argument is in this crisis we face, this great social, economic crisis, this is really a political crisis. How will we politically solve these issues, address the problem that face us? And our dream, of course, is that it be solved democratically through humane policy, just policy, rational policy, the result of debate, thought, participation. That's the dream scenario. In the nightmare scenarios, they're not solved at all. And given the nature of these problems, to which we would include the environmental crisis, the stakes are fairly high. Now, in the book, what John Nichols and I do is we try to look at other periods in modern history when capitalist nations and democracies have had similar sort of economic problems facing them. And the great period, of course, is the 1930s. In the 1930s, massive unemployment was the order of the day in virtually the entire industrial world. Western Europe, in North America. And we saw two things emerge in the context of the Great Depression of the 1930s, two phenomena. One of which is the rise of democratic socialism, Keynesianism, social democracy, efforts to have the government enter in to deal with the crisis in the private economy, and deepen the democratic roots of the society, democratic nature of society. And the other great phenomenon of the 1930s was the emergence of fascism as a movement to address the problem of the economy, but without having the state against democracy, or by denying it, by turning to militarism instead. And crudely put, those were the two great new developments, the great developments that came with the crisis of the 1930s. And we argued in our book, that that's what we should expect in the United States. Those sort of political trends will happen, because what happens in a moment like the one we're in now, and what we're seeing already this year, is that the center, the mainstream, the traditional parties, in this case the Republicans and Democrats, with their traditional policies, increasingly prove incapable of dealing with the problems. They increasingly prove bankrupt, part of the problem, not part of the solution. And that's why people abandon them. And that's what's happening right now in this country. It's happening faster than I thought it was going to happen, but it's happening. I didn't think it would be this election cycle, but it was obviously, looking at the tea leaves of the last 10 years, this is the trajectory we've been on for a while now. Now, when we sent the first copy of our book, the draft of this book, to our editor in New York in May of last year, May 2015, our editor, and this book's about the United States, it's written for Americans, it's based entirely on the American experience, it's not a global book. Our editor immediately wrote back and said, a lot of nice things, but she said, all this stuff about socialism and fascism, you can't put that in a book about Americans. That has nothing to do with America. No American's going to buy that. This is in May of 2015. Well, 6 months later, she sent an apologetic email to both of us saying, you guys might be onto something here. After Bernie Sanders and Trump became the real stories of the election cycle. And what's interesting about the election cycle is that elections are usually the last place that social change shows up. Usually you see all sorts of grassroots activity that goes on for years and local initiatives. And then finally it bubbles up through the election cycle. Because our election system, if you know anything else about American civics, is built to resist change. Our election system is not built to encourage participation and change and anticipating problems and leaping to them to the front. No, our election system is built basically to preserve the status quo. It has to be dragged kicking and screaming to make changes. So that's where you expect to see stuff happen last. And it happened more quickly. There was suggesting, sort of like climate change, these things veer out of control. They can't be predicted or anticipated how quickly they're going to evolve. Oops, I have my phone. That's not me. Someone's got the same ringtones. Okay, good choice. So, what I want to do is look at the election system right now, and the rest of the book, and really ignore everything about Trump. But what's interesting about Trump is this. In some ways, we're lucky to have Trump. And what I mean by that is, the immigrant bashing, the chauvinism, the racism, the strongman approach, trust me, I'll solve everything, just don't care about how I do it. The machismo, the disregard for facts and the rule of law, the narcissism, do I keep going on? The sociopathy, you get it. All the elements that he demonstrates are really strongly associated historically with fascism. I'm not saying he is a fascist, but this is the sort of stuff you see in fascist movements, exactly the stuff he exhibits. And I think it's scary to think that someone in this election or in a coming election cycle, keep your eye out for, was promoting Trump's politics, but who was actually a person who was confident and talented and industrious and wasn't a psychopath, or at least wasn't so overtly one. If we had someone actually who was a really good politician advancing, it'd be scary. We're lucky Trump is such an imbecile, frankly. Because he's digging his own grave because of his stupidity and laziness and who he is. But what he represents is a real thing. It's not, he didn't create it. He just opportunistically jumped in front of the wave. He doesn't even understand it. But it's a real phenomenon that's not going away. That's what we write about in the book, and that's what I want to talk about a little bit here today. So the system's not built for change. Just the nature of this election points to that. Basically, Donald Trump's main reason to vote for him, he says blatantly, is Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's main reason to vote for her is Donald Trump. They are the two most unpopular presidential candidates in American history since they started keeping that poll figure in the last 70 years. It's quite an astonishing statement how unpopular they are. And it's quite an astonishing statement that our political system makes it so that we're reduced to that position as citizens, voting for one or two of the most unpopular candidates we've had in decades. And it points to just how difficult the two-party system has made genuine democratic politics, and how much it's been a monopolistic hold on ideas, innovation, policies, and a negative force in this country. Which everyone sort of understands, but you take it for granted, like the Rocky Mountain range. But it needs to be understood, because it is really a barrier, and it's got to be addressed at some point. I had a thesis at once, I don't know if I had to study, because I haven't done this work for a few years, but back in the 1990s, those Eastern European countries that were leaving communism and becoming democracies, one of the things that surprised me was the old communist parties, now that they were competing for votes, and a lot of these countries were getting like 30% of the vote, 35% of the vote. I figured they'd be wiped out, they'd be lucky to get 5% of the vote. And I had a theory back then that if we had sort of open elections where there was no lesser of two evils, you didn't have to worry about that when you voted, you could just vote for whoever you wanted, you didn't have to worry about lesser of two evils. And there are ways to do that, but that's a separate discussion. That the Republicans and Democrats would probably get about 30 or 40% of the vote combined. I figured they really didn't have that much deeper entrenched support in the population than the Communist parties did in Eastern Europe. And I think that's absolutely true today. Absolutely true if you get to people under the age of 35. I mean, those parties are, the heart and soul of those parties really are not embraced. Another point, I write about this for a living. I'm going to talk about this at the end of the talk in a few minutes, but it's worth raising now. It's difficult to watch an election like this and not constantly be struck at how our news media are utterly worthless in this country. Zero nutritional value. I work out in the gym every day where they have CNN and Fox and MSNBC on all the time. You're forced to watch them. It's almost, God, please give me an infomercial. And you're watching it, and they're just talking about trivia endlessly. It's really, you could have this sort of coverage of a Politburo election in the Soviet Union in 1953. There's no actual content. It's gossip. There's no actual journalism being done. It's just one source talking to another source, people throwing spin lines at each other. It's really quite extraordinary what we're at. You know, our news media, you know, we have about the lowest voter turnout of any democratic country in the world. I mean, it's astonishingly low. We have strong efforts to suppress the vote. By all accounts, we have what are called low information voters, people who really don't know what they're voting for. Our news media should be held accountable for this. I mean, their function in our governing system from the beginning has been to make sure that didn't happen. Yet our news media basically encourage this, reinforce it. They ignore the great problems. They give the illusion we're a democracy when, in fact, we're far from it. So now on to the meat of my points about this election. What are we going to learn? Those are things we've known for a while. Well, first of all, Trump is not the only problem for the Republican Party. The Republican Party has been in my opinion, in a deep crisis, arguably we're not, for election laws keeping the two-party system in place, in a virtual death spiral for about a decade now. And I think that the Trump thing is a result of that, not a cause of that. It's what you're going to get at the end of this process. What do I mean by that? Well, the Republican Party in 2006 and 2008 was the first time a major party has been lost in a landslide election in 2 consecutive elections since the Great Depression and the New Deal and FDR. Never before that happened in the intervening 60 years. And, you know, by the time Obama won his re-election in 2008, the Republican Party was very close to being at the lowest ebb of any major party in American history since the Civil War. It had very little appeal to people under the age of 35 or 40. It had very little appeal to people who weren't white and people who weren't old. Its core demographics were shrinking and they were becoming heavily regional. It did not look like it would win a national election. It only was one vote away from losing veto power in the U.S. Senate. And the 2010 elections looked like they would favor the Democrats. If you look at actually how the Senate broke down, it looked like that a successful first 2 years of the Democrats could actually put the Republicans out of business. Obama, regrettably, whatever one might be, elected not to pursue the course of putting them out of business or even putting them on the defense. He dusted them off, helped them up off the map, and basically allowed them to stop him from doing anything. He didn't fight them. He decommissioned his troops, said to all his supporters, go home, I don't need you anymore. Thanks, I'll call you in 4 years, and I'll need to check them, but until then, me and the other guys from Harvard will run the country. Leave it to us. That doesn't change. So they gave the illusion the Republicans are making a feisty grassroots comeback with the Tea Party. Quite the contrary. It's a party that has absolutely nothing to offer. It has no governing program whatsoever. It offers nihilism. We can shut the government down. It offers all this half-baked free market rhetoric sitting on top of the most monopolized economy they champion. There's a disconnect there. It offers up small government and individual freedom while they sit on top of a surveillance state, the most pervasive in American history, which they champion. And this is a problem for their own voters, not just for people like myself who aren't among their voting base. Their own voters are confused. They're getting all these promises and all this lack of production. And they don't even know what to get from the government if it's in power. There's really nothing to offer. And it's just a matter of time until the voters are revolted. And I think that's what's happened with the Trump phenomenon. The voters revolted, and Trump gave them sort of the nihilistic, suicide bomb for them to all take. But it's a sign of a party, in my view, largely in its death throes. And a party, because of that, why we should be concerned, a party that is eligible or susceptible to moving dramatically to the right in fundamentally new types of ways in terms of racism, immigrant bashing, civil liberties that are frightening. And because we live in a system where the two parties are locked in, nothing in our Constitution but by laws created by the two parties and maintained by the two parties, it's very hard to push them out. Even if they're dead, it's going to be they're going to have power, and they're going to be hard to get rid of. And I don't think we can afford to have one of our two parties in the two-party system be a fascist party, or to be a quasi-fascist party. The two-party system can't afford that. So I think we all have a stake, even non-Republicans, in trying to get that party doing something very different or getting rid of it, one or the other, but not allowing the status quo that's unraveling to maintain. That will only portend very bad things for the country. Next point I'd like to make is that the Democratic Party, in my view, is in every bit as serious a crisis as the Republican. Of course, they're the beneficiaries of the demographic change and the changes in the country. They're going to win pretty much every national election, probably for the foreseeable future. But the question is what they're going to do with the power they get and how they're going to handle it. And the track record so far of the Democratic Party is that it's pretty corrupt itself, too, although probably every bit as hypocritical. They're really the champion party of the status quo while triangulating voters as the lesser of two evils. So say it's either us or them. Well, of course, people vote for the Democrats, maybe they are. But the Democrats have no incentive to deliver the goods because it's always us or them, so they can do whatever they want. So labor unions aggressively work for Democrats. The Democrats want some power and instantly pass these trade deals. Labor unions have no choice. That's your best bet. You have no alternative. It's either us or them. And I think that has been sort of the positive downwards by all American electoral politics, the disillusionment so many Americans have when you put the two parties together. And here I'd like to get to the point I'll conclude on, the point I know the most about, and I think that's most interesting in American politics, which is the great development of the last year and a half has been the Sanders campaign and what it represents. And I think that it's sort of quickly been forgotten in the mainstream media, except as a throwaway line. But what happened there was extraordinary in the historical sense. If you stick with the president's history. And I think for someone like myself who's been active in politics since the presidential elections as an activist since 1972, there's really been nothing like this in a very, very, very long time. It really comes close to this phenomenon. And I confess I've known Sanders for a while. I've worked with him, I've advised him, I've written speeches for him, so I'm not neutral, I'm not unbiased. Someone I have a lot of respect for. But I've worked on other candidates' campaigns with other candidates, similar politics to Sanders. And I introduced Dennis Kucinich here. In fact, he ran for president like 12 years ago, I think it was. And I They actually had a pretty good crowd of 400 people over there. It was really quite extraordinary. Well, Sanders took this to an entirely different level by orders of magnitude right away with no media support whatsoever, all word of mouth. I'll give you an example. But the first, he came to Madison on July 2nd, 2015, just after he announced his campaign. And he had been in Iowa doing a few events before he came to Madison. And already the word was out. The buzz was out. He was drawing unbelievable Elvis crowds without any publicity. He went to a town of 2,000 and drew 3,000 people. Basically, people from all over the state were coming in to hear him talk. You know, we know not to drawing crowds at all in the state. He's getting these huge crowds. He comes to Madison on 2 days' notice. The only room that he gets the hockey arena, which seats 10,000. And so we drove him to the event, and there's a huge traffic jam at 7 o'clock outside of this basketball arena, hockey arena. And we're going, what the hell's going on? I hope there must be something going on here besides Sanders. And then we don't, to see Sanders. And we couldn't believe it. So we had to park a mile away from the arena. And here we are, Bernie and his wife Jane, and me and my wife, and like Bernie's aides and a couple of people were running into the arena. We're late already, so we couldn't get close enough. And people recognized it. And it was a different crowd than sort of the granola hippie crowd you expect. There's plenty of them. It's a big town. But it was mostly working class people coming up to him, just shaking his hand, saying, thank you, finally a politician stands for us. It was really moving experience. So then we go into we finally get to the place, we knock on the door, we promised we're connected to the speakers, they let us in the back door. And there's a huge black screen that's up behind the stage. And then I open the screen and look out, there's 10,000 people standing room only, the place is packed. And then it was really, I couldn't believe this. I've never seen it. You know, I've been to a lot of events. Usually like 1,000 people would have been considered an incredible turnout. And then Bernie says, Bernie, look at this. He pulls the screen, looks out, and someone up there says, Bernie! And they start the Bernie chant. 10,000 people, the building's shaking. And I'm going, okay, this is a completely different historical moment. Right? This is a new thing here. And so, you know, what is new about it? It's not just the level of support, which was unimaginable. Bernie won 12 years ago, he would have gotten 2%. He would have been Dennis Kucinich. I mean, for all due respect to Bernie, I love the man, but he would have been Dennis Kucinich. He's not Elvis. He's not the world's most charismatic guy. He's just a principled guy, and people pick up on that. But what he did, what he accomplished in this campaign, let's just go through some of the crucial things. Capitalism is now on the agenda. He's made it legitimate. So maybe we've got a right to have an economy that works for us. We don't just have to work for the economy. Maybe that's a justifiable concern. That's new. He plowed the icebreaker there. Real climate change is now on the agenda. The idea that we've got to stop drilling for fossil fuels. That's not a negotiable thing. That's the starting point of a sane policy. That's something no other politician can say, and neither of the two major parties. And now it's generally understood as a way to approach the issue. That's a major accomplishment. Money in politics. Of course, every politician has a line about it, but very few are serious. He was serious about it. He said, yeah, this is something we really got to do, and I'll do it in my own campaign. No corporate money, no super PACs, no hidden money. Healthcare and higher education is rights, not as something maybe as gifts or something you fight for, something you deserve in a free and advanced society. These are things that people, you know, took from the campaign. He educated people, and they embraced that, and they understand those issues. They aren't giving up on those issues just because his campaign did not get the nomination. And what we owe a great thanks to Bernie for as well is the idea that he wants to have a political revolution. Just come out and say it. Use that term. Well, how is it Reagan gets used the term, but Bernie Sanders doesn't? Why not just say that we have to fundamentally change the way power works? We have to democratize our governing system. And that's going to take some radical reforms to get the job done. There was one area that Sanders didn't go in my opinion, and I think it was the weakest spot in his campaign. And I told him this. And which is he didn't go after militarism anywhere near as efficient as he should have, with the U.S. empire. And his heart's in the right place. There his voting record's in the right place. His speech on the Iraq War, still opposing it in the floor of the House, is the best speech any politician gave against the Iraq War. He was Mr. Ramos that day. Incredibly prescient about what would follow in the next 12 years. And he opposes all these crazy wars that other politicians enjoy and promote. But I think, militarism, we're such a heavily militarized society for the central role, it's got to be an issue in our politics. Right? We've got to get it removed from the sacred status that we had currently with Trump and Clinton, where they're dueling with each other to see who can build the most nuclear weapons, who can have the most macho foreign policy. That's a dead end street. That's got to go. And I wish Bernie had gotten that on the table, because I think the American people are very responsive to that sort of argument at this point. I think that for the first time in a long time, I'll give you some interesting evidence that sort of backs it up. My anecdotal evidence, and talking to friends of mine who've been in the same boat, is that the American people are exhausted of being an empire. The benefits of spending $1 trillion a year on militarism are not fully appreciated by people. They think there might be better uses of the money. Not sure what we're fighting for. No one knows what we're fighting for. No one can name all the countries we're fighting in. Even people in government don't know how many countries we're attacking at any given time. And one of the things that was striking, and I don't know the final data figures, but about halfway through the campaign, I was going through the donation figures of the various candidates. And as you might know, if you give the money to candidates, if you give over a certain amount, I think it's $100 or $200, you have to tell your profession. And you give your donation to the official campaign, so they know who you work for, who your employer is. And only one candidate had, among the top 10 groups, they list their donors by their employer, what company employed them, and then what industry they worked in. And only one candidate, of all the candidates, Republican or Democrat, had among their top 10 groups of donors members of the armed forces from both the Navy, Air Force, and Army. That was Bernie. Bernie had enormous rank-and-file support in the armed forces. And I think that's because, from my experience, the soldiers and the troops in the armed forces, are not workers. They're not like dying to go to war. They've been to all these wars. They know how bankrupt they are. And they're glad they're home. They don't want to send anyone else back to these wars just because some politician thinks it'll help their ratings or prove some other point. And I think we're ready for a national discussion across the board, in the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party position. I wish Bernie had raised it. It's going to have to come soon, because there's no way you're going to reform anything in this country if we remain spending well over half the amount of militarism in the world in one country compared to the rest of the world combined. We just can't do that. We've got to change the way we operate. And the militarism extends to everyday life, like police forces, domestically to the surveillance culture. I mean, it's all of a piece. And then that issue, I think he got to better, the domestic side of it, but I think that eventually that's the next stage is going to go to our political debate. Of course, the one thing people did notice about Bernie that's worth noting is that young people flocked to his campaign, and historically, as far as I could tell, unprecedented numbers. And I think what we argue in our book, and I think what this is representative of, what the change that's taking place, is that I was there back in the early 1970s when young people made this very rapid transition from being very engaged in politics to sort of tuning it out. We really saw like a 4 or 5 year period where politics went from being what all the smartest foolish people did to being something smart, cool people didn't do. It's just sort of like for weirdos. And, I stuck with it. I guess that shows you which camp I was in. And, but what's happening now is I think we're seeing that long era of depoliticization over politics. Doing politics now for a young person is increasingly less a lifestyle choice. Like, I'll be a hockey fan, or I'm going to learn to play guitar, or maybe I'll do politics. It's rather a lifestyle. It's not a lifestyle choice. It's not a hobby. It's really a matter of survival. Politics will do you. It's whether you're going to be involved or how it's going to turn out. I think that is increasingly clear in an environment of more hopelessness economically, where political decisions make all the difference in the world. And I've been struck, I was away from campus last year, not teaching, I've been struck this fall from the I was interested to see how my undergrads, what they'd be like. And in one of my classes, which is a senior seminar, we read books, and the students have, every couple of weeks, they have a discussion that they do all the talking, and I listen. And one of the books they were discussing has the material on politics at the end, but they went off in a long discussion of the 2016 presidential race. And what struck me, it's not a class in the way because I'm teaching it, so I know who I am. It's rather it's one that you have to take as your major in our department. So it's like a cross-section of our majors. And it was stunning to really talk about politics, because I felt like I was at a Bernie Sanders briefing meeting on policy issues. And these are students including, students who were traditionally stereotyped as being unsympathetic to Democratic Party or liberal politics or certainly left-wing politics. And I was surprised how sophisticated the analysis was compared to 10 years earlier, if I listened to a bunch of students talk. They really, I think, what media are they consuming? I want to start reading this media. I mean, that's pretty impressive what they were saying on a whole range of issues. And it sort of gave me the sense that this isn't going away. Bernie Sanders wasn't a one-off, like some piper who offered free weed and that's important. How kids go back to the house and get a weed. No, this is a spark. This is not going away until we solve the problems in this country. It's going to be the story of the next 10 to 20 years. As for Hillary Clinton, I think you can make the case she's probably the luckiest person since Ringo Starr or Jed Clampett. I mean, how do you get an opponent like Donald Trump? My God. Just the stuff that's come out about her in the WikiLeaks revelations in a sane society would be enough to derail a campaign. In my opinion, from what I've seen, of course, it's hard to know because very few journalists are actually investigating those WikiLeaks and part of the journalists decide them. But it pales next to whatever Trump's doing and the press coverage Trump's getting. And one of the things that's striking about Hillary Clinton is often when they talk about her unpopularity, part of it's ginned up by the right wing traditionally. But I think part of the reason she's unpopular really has nothing to do with her. Any more than the reason all those mainstream Republican candidates were so unpopular in their primaries. From Kuhn, the guy from New Jersey, Christie, to Jeb Bush, to Rick Baker, whatever that guy's from, this guy from Texas. Rick Perry. They all blend together to me. But all these guys were unpopular. It wasn't that they were personally unpopular. And I think in Hillary's case, it's not that she's personally unpopular. I think that her weakness with her own voters as well as general voters, especially the Democratic Party, was simply what she represented. She was seen as the person of the establishment, who represented money and politics, the Pentagon, and Wall Street. And basically pretty words about trade when you get elected, and you throw the words away as soon as the election's over and go about your business. And I think that was why she had problems. And I think that this was reinforced to me when I met the National Nurses United political organizers in Oakland. And they were the union, it's probably the most aggressive union that supported Sanders. Someone's getting a lot of phone messages. Go ahead and answer. Must be important. The National Nurses United said they were going to Iowa and New Hampshire doing a lot of the groundwork for the Sanders campaign. And they were, the thing that struck them was how disinterested voters were, Democratic voters were in Clinton. They just kind of made sense of it. And then they talked to their people who worked for Republican candidates, and they were saying, oh, that sounds just like a lot of Republican candidates. These candidates just aren't registering. And I think we have to understand that Hillary Clinton's problem is a lot of it's just what she represents and embodies, not her personally. And were any mainstream Democrat been in that position, they would have gotten a similarly unenthusiastic, I would say equally unenthusiastic response. I could go on, and I'm going to conclude on one point, and then we'll get the discussion. It's easy to talk about how horrible the media coverage has been, how biased it's been. That's a whole lecture in itself. I want to talk, and it's all true. I want to talk instead about something that's not talked about as much, which is that the real story about journalism in this election is how there isn't any. We don't really have much news media left. This is a long-term trend I've written about a lot. I think I've spoken at this forum in the past about it. Today we have a significantly fewer number of working reporters in this country per capita than we did 20 years ago. I mean, our newsrooms look like, the Polish countryside in 1945. I mean, they're decimated. We hardly have any journalists covering anything. Most electoral races aren't even covered anymore in any sort of news media people have access to. You're basically a pawn of political ads and the spin on TV news is what you're left to. For any sense of any races, the only race that gets any sort of coverage of note probably is the presidential race and possibly the occasional senatorial or gubernatorial race. But other than that, you're on your own. The TV ads paid for by money, oftentimes unaccountable money. And this is not because journalism is incompetent as much as it's non-existent. We just don't have that many working journalists anymore. You know, if you go to CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, I think you'd be shocked to see how few actual journalists there are cover anything. You have producers or bookers who book guests. And when they have journalists on, people usually work with a handful of newsrooms to their left, like the New York Times, who come to report on their stories. Then they have 5 spin meisters who present party talking points, so I don't think about the story someone else did. And that's what's called journalism. It's just not journalism. You know, what should be striking to everyone here is all the charges against Trump that have come up, and not just in his sexual behavior, but also his business dealings, his taxes, all the stuff in his sort of sleazeball career. Take all that Trump stuff on one side, and then all the charges against Hillary, which I think are very serious, far more serious than the stuff with the Clinton Foundation, her conduct as Secretary of State, her doing all these corporate speeches and making a fortune doing it, which she's planning to run for president, unprecedented in American history, $22 million in a private bank account. These secret talks that we're only now learning were really pep talks for corporate America. And we shouldn't have to learn about these things because of WikiLeaks. We shouldn't have to learn about these things because of WikiLeaks. These things, we should have had working journalists investigating all this stuff long before the primaries were over. So if there were issues, this would have been solved before they made it to the general election. We should have known about Donald Trump before the. It's not like there weren't reasons to suspect Donald Trump. The stuff about Hillary was out there, so no one did any research on it. You know, you're reduced basically to Glenn Greenwald and people at The Intercept, but the only people, they can only cover so much. It was like 2 or 3 humans. You know, we don't have the journalists to do the resources. And one of the great issues we have politically going forward is we have to rejuvenate our news media system with genuine independent newsrooms covering communities in competition with each other with the resources to do it well. To get on top of these stories when they come, and not go through postmortems for us after the person's elected to office. We need to make that a high priority. Sanders talked about that, but he gave no details. But it's an issue that's going to have to be increasingly part of the debate, along with the other stuff that we've been talking about. Because unless it gets to be part of the debate, it's going to be awfully hard to make progress. I mean, social media can only take us so far. We need actual reporting, actual journalism to get where we need to go as a democratic society. So I have a lot of friends who are depressed about the election, the range of the options in this November, how it seems like all the energy has been wasted, that it's hopeless. I think just the opposite. I think stand back, take a look. It's extraordinary what's happened. We are in treacherous times, but treacherous times hold options for something very good happening, but it means that we need all hands on deck. People will take politics very seriously in the coming years, more than they ever have in their life. And it wouldn't surprise me, there's no reason to think we're not really much in a situation in this country much like South Africa in 1988. Thank you. We'll take questions, but we've got to wait to make sure you talk into the gizmos, so, because they're recording the show. Okay, I'm going to repeat questions. Okay, sir.
So where are young people getting their information from, as well as everybody else? In fact, if there's this tendency to support, for example, Bernie Sanders compared to the rest?
That's a great question, and I think there's a lot of research that's going to be done on that, so I can only speculate. Obviously, I've interviewed every young person on this issue and done research. I think that a lot of it came from Bernie himself. I think that Bernie's raising issues got people to think about them. And that's, he used it as a teaching moment, his campaigner. If you saw Bernie Sanders' campaign speech, I suspect many of you did, they usually ran an hour and 10 minutes. And they were the same speech with minor modifications, but they were like 30 or 40 different, he raised issue after issue and talked about them and explained them. They were educational lectures in many respects. They were stump speeches, but lectures too. There was very little spin and gossip, any of the stuff you normally associate with campaigns. Very little text on the opponent, the opposition. It was almost all talked about the issues raised. I think social media plays a huge bit. Reddit page, which I was commenting on for Sanders, was very important in mobilizing hundreds of thousands of people. So that plays a role. But also what you learn when you go to the Reddit page or social media is how important is that actual journalism. So people are getting hungry for real journalism that they can really spread and comment on. And, you know, there wasn't enough of it. But I mean, it's the best you could do. You spread the resources through social media, which was very effective at doing that. Here, that's it.
One of the results of the election is that Bernie Sanders and his organization has an extraordinarily powerful database of supporters. I've been very impressed because I get an email from them every day or two saying things like, we've identified a dozen ballot measures around the country that you should be contributing for. Or we've got 37 progressive candidates, and here's their names, and why don't you forget about them? That's never going to work, because the big money can concentrate on any race that they think is important to them, and inundate their Bernie supportive position with lots of money. But there is a way that can work. It's based on machinery that was set up by the populist back in the early part of the last century, where citizen initiatives can put something on the ballot. And there is an organization called Represent Us that is trying to do this. They've got things going to this cycle in Washington and South Dakota, where they're trying to pass acts that will by citizen referendum that will allow an honest state government to be elected in those two states and hopefully in more states in the future. And with an honest government in place, the elections can be on even at the federal level, and there's some hope of getting the country back. And I want you to see what you think of this.
Well, I'm not going to repeat that question. Is that a true-false question? Or? Well, thank you for that question. That was impressive. Actually, the guy who started Represent Us was Josh Silver, who I started Free Press with. So I'll tell Josh about your question and give you a golden medal. Thank you for that comment. I mean, I think that what you're talking about, the initiative route is important. But if you read the book Dollarocracy I wrote, John Nicholas, you know the big money loves to crush initiatives too and to distort them, not just political candidates. So money has an effect on those races as well. I think that one of the lessons of the Bernie campaign was that, and I've written a book about money in politics, and I absolutely agree how insidious it is, how dominant it is. But one of the lessons is if you actually be real organizing, you can still win some stuff. Bernie did not lose to Hillary Clinton because she had more money. He lost to her for other reasons. And it wasn't money. I think you can win all those races that the Sanders group, Our Revolution, is proposing. If people in the community went out and organized and go door to door, you can beat big money. Bernie Sanders got elected statewide in Vermont to the U.S. Senate, to the U.S. House 9 times. He never had a single millionaire bankrolling him and giving him big checks and refused to take it. He did it because he had an army of people who went door to door. Probably by then, he probably has met everyone in Vermont now personally himself. But I mean, you can get around big money. It's harder. The degree of difficulty is tougher, but you don't give up. And just obviously, you don't give up because you want to do the Represent Us thing to get money out of politics and understand the centrality. But we can't let it demobilize us. And I think at those local races is really the place you can really do it. It's there. The TV ads are less likely the state assembly race to be a huge deal because it's like overkill to buy an ad for the Chicago area, Chicago TV for a race that is one small neighborhood or a couple small suburban area. Then you can actually do organizing to beat money. So I mean, I don't know if that's an answer to that.
I urge other questioners to come up here and get a little better quality on the recording.
Yeah, maybe that's, if you have a question, just come on up.
There is an initiative in Maine, the ranked voting runoff voting system, which I hope represent us is that, because you mentioned part of this, you mentioned that we don't get a fascist party, and you didn't say neoliberal, but I think it may be an important way of getting at it. What I see is happening is the Democrats are just taking a lot of moderate Republican stances on so many things, and that's one of the reasons why I think everybody was flailing into this miasma. That's not very good.
Another true-false question. I love this. It's a really easy test. I've got a 50-50 shot on every question. Good points, all. If not, ask your question to the mic.
I wanted to thank you, first of all, for the talk. It was really helpful. And I'm curious, I don't know how many teachers are in the room, but how do you suggest we bring these kinds of issues into the classroom? Especially some of us are, I'm a TA in your department, obviously, but it's not an easy position to be in. Or if you're in TFC and you don't have the kind of job security someone who is tenured has.
Well, that's a great question. I think it depends what you're teaching. I mean, obviously, if you're teaching engineering, you start raising issues like some of the stuff, and that's not really what you're here for, studying engineering. If you're teaching political science or communication, like I do, like we do, the courses I teach all need lots of space for discussion of contemporary events and current events. And then I don't find it's very hard about it. But plenty of people won't talk about these issues. That's the thing that's so encouraging to me. It's not like this could be an assessment, that usual stuff, but rather it's like people are really interested in these issues when they have to see them being discussed and have an opportunity to participate. So it depends on what you're teaching. I can't give a prescription for every class because you do differently depending on what the course materials that you're teaching. Sorry about that. Yeah, come on up.
Like the others, I can't thank you enough for what you've shared. Will you share your thoughts about the days and weeks after the election if a pro-Trump electorate does not believe that if supposing they lose the election, that it was fairly lost? How are we, fellow Americans, going to continue to live together? Challenge to the Supreme Court? Thank you.
That's a really good question. It's a frightening one. And again, I can't put my Nostradamus hat on, so I don't have any insights. Anyone here can give as good a prediction as I can give. But there's no doubt that a certain element of the Trump base has been ginned up to think that the world is against them. It's a conspiracy. That Trump loses, it can only be because the election machines were rigged. So I think that the idea that would lead to like a civil war or a police thing or something really frightening along those lines, 7 days in May or something, is pretty limited because Trump has alienated himself from the Republican establishment, from the corporate establishment, from the military establishment. I don't think he has a base of support that would lead me to fear that he could legitimately challenge constitutional governance in this country. But I do think it's interesting that we're even having that conversation. That's a legitimate question someone's raising, and you can't just say that's crazy talk. That there's actually people thinking like this around the country. And I think that we're going to have a lot more of this sort of crazy talk if the projection of where our country is going is right, that as problems grow more severe, the government proves increasingly ineffectual. Desperate people are going to be really seeking out solutions, and this is the sort of stuff that starts to happen. In the back, come on up. I feel like money home.
I'd like you to clarify something that you brought up near the beginning of your talk, and then I think you touched on it, particularly when you talked about Bernie. Whether the American democracy can accommodate change or basically is just for the status quo. And I'm thinking of two distinctions that maybe you could clarify. One is between the system and the leaders or the people who are in the system. Because it seems to me the system of checks and balances and from the ground up democracy can accommodate change. But it depends on the leaders. And obviously in the state of Illinois, our leaders are blocking change. So it's not just a question of the system, it's a question of the leaders and their intent or their accountability. But maybe we need to distinguish between gradual change or reform versus radical change. And if gradual change is restricted or put down for too long, pressures build up for radical change because we haven't been accommodating and correcting the situation in the country. So could you clarify the American system a little more?
I think those are good points. Thank you, Rick. I think sometimes it's easy to look at our Constitution and how difficult it is to amend and all the checks and balances that were put in partially to prevent tyranny and clearly to prevent popular governance and having too much power simultaneously. It's easy to look at that as sort of all obstructive, but I think you're right that if you change the leaders and you have a strong popular base of support, you can bend the system, like you can bend any democratic system or ostensibly democratic system. And then, but part of the resistance to change is that it's hard to change your leaders. That gets into the two-party system. It's very hard, even with popular dissatisfaction with the two parties, to get an alternative. Or even to go inside a party, as Sanders has learned, and not have the thing rigged against you as it was against him by the party in this primary race. And that's sort of related to it in that sense. But I do think, if you get popular support and you have effective organization, you can eventually win. It's just not a level playing field. It's going to be difficult. As for social change, I think that you're right. If you postpone necessary reforms long enough, the problems grow into severe, and it will require and necessitate radical change. And I think that may well be a good way to look at what we're going into. I think, though, the thing about social change is, the more I study is, it tends to come quickly, it tends to be unanticipated, and in retrospect, everyone acts like they saw it coming all along. And so it's not, that's what I expect will happen in the next 10 or 15 years. And it doesn't necessarily be social change for the better. I mean, if we sit in our closets and sit it out, there are a lot of people like your friends that you're talking about, not your friends, but the people you're talking about, who will be glad to make a social change without your consent or advice. And that's every bit as a concern. You go for a second question, you have to pay $1 to do why.
You haven't mentioned anything about third parties, and I also have in mind why Bernie Sanders did not perhaps support a third-party system. Well, I do understand, but I'd like you to comment on it anyway.
Oh, I think, the point that the gentleman made, we just took off, there you go, about instant runoff voting, or ranked choice voting, which would instantly revolutionize American politics, for the better, in my opinion. It'd be a dream scenario, and everyone in America loves it except the people who run the Republican and Democratic parties, and those politicians. Because if you had ranked choice or instant runoff voting, you would no longer have lesser two-level voting, ever. It would end that. So you could vote, if you were a Jill Stein supporter or a Gary Johnson supporter, you could vote for them to your heart's content, and it would have no effect on electing the worst of Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. Because basically, did you all know how ranked choice or instant runoff voting works? Yeah, I mean, you have to get 51% of the votes to win, and you rank your people you vote. In the case of President this year, 1 through 4. And if someone, after counting all the first place votes for every voter, doesn't have a majority, they throw out the last place and they count their second place votes and distribute that. They keep doing that until someone finally gets 51% of the vote. But it means if I wanted to vote for Jill Stein, but I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton because I just still want to take a chance at Donald Trump. There's been a lot of people I know where they're having that thought. Or Gary Johnson instead of Hillary Clinton. It wouldn't matter. So if Donald Trump got 51% of the vote, and you were going to vote for him anyway, it wouldn't matter if you voted for Hillary Clinton or Jill Stein. But if he gets under 50%, then he won't win. And probably Jill Stein's votes would be thrown out, and number 2 votes would all be Hillary Clinton votes, and she would win in the second round. So you wouldn't lose by voting for who you actually wanted. And the idea of this instant runoff voting is that it not only makes it possible for third parties to exist without penalizing one of the 2 main parties they're closest to, but it also is a corrective to get new ideas into the political, even when you get new ideas out there and understood and debated. Imagine how much better these debates would have been if Jill Stein and Gary Johnson had been on the debate stage, even if you had no interest in them. Because there would have been none of the personal life. It would have been issues. Environmental stuff, war and peace, legalizing weed. It would have all been the issues people care about. And one of the great things about multi-candidate races, at least in Europe and the rest of the world, is the negativism goes way down. It's the problem with negativism when you have 4 candidates running. If candidate B is trashing candidate A, then the people who were going to vote for A aren't going to vote for B, they're going to vote for C or D. So the winners in the negative assaults are the people who don't get involved and get dirtied by it. And in a two-party race, there's no cost. There's only two choices, and that's how people do it. And the lesser of two evil reinforces you only have two choices. So things like Instagram athletics, I think Sanders would have supported had he been elected, would be a godsend. And there's other things too. Political scientists have a whole list of wonderful ways we could make it more open. It's not that difficult. It doesn't require constitutional amendments. But the reason we don't have it is pure and simple. The two parties don't want competition. You know, George Carlin once put it best. He said, Americans love competition. We have all sorts of competition. Except the places we don't have the two places we need it most. Political parties and phone companies. You get that one over the fence. All right, well, thank you all very much.
What did I do, Trey?
Oh, I can take it for you.
Okay,
thanks. Thanks for coming.
Excuse me for interrupting. I'm going to interrupt for just a minute. I know there are lots of nice conversations going on. I'm going to interrupt for just a minute. 3 people have now asked me to please announce about Steve Shoemaker's funeral, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Steve Shoemaker's funeral is Saturday night at 7 o'clock, so tomorrow night at 7 o'clock at First Presbyterian Church in Urbana on Green Street. So 7 o'clock tomorrow night, First Presbyterian Urbana. There will be a dessert reception following, so there will be a chance to sit around and share stories.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
How many so few people get to do?
In the community. She knows about local violence. I do like that. Did you have that show on the I watch it. I still got it on PVR. I sold on erase it because it was so good. It probably
Next semester, we're going to do state of the state.
super high speed. And not only that, and then there's little
Good question. Trying to be not
despondent.
Oh, I'm not despondent at all. You are?
Oh, no. I'm still putting the food out there.
When I was a 18, 19-year-old, I talked about
All right, let's go.
And I hear people saying to me, "We want revolution." The protracted. They're ready for a revolution.
They're going to take their country back.
Well, you know, a lot of the things that we in our cohort talked about back in the day didn't make a lot of sense either.
Yeah.
It's just that our hearts were in the right place, and we didn't want war, specifically we didn't want war, and we didn't want racism.
It's wrong.
because it's wrong. And so I will say there is a big difference between a fascist revolution and a misguided, poorly conceived liberal.
It's just going to go on.
Fascism,
And then
there was fascism in this country.
wherever someone puts a microphone in front of them or gives them a stage, it'll just go on.
And it's, I
As soon as
think
they start
what,
talking about arresting their opponent, that's the first thing that comes up.
well, Bob's absolutely right. It's not just Trump. Trump is certainly a colorful and disgusting.
Adolescent. He's an adolescent. He's a 14-year-old boy. We don't want a 14-year-old boy.
But the fact that he is so popular is what's really scary.
Well, Hitler was popular too.
That's exactly, you got it.
Mussolini was popular.
You got it.
I said hello.
Oh, thank you. Okay. I always feel better when I'm here and I can get some hugs and be around the people.
That's right. I'm with you on that, Jay. I'm with you.
I'm ill at ease.
I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, I can. My body's. Come on, our bodies are.
So that they're not.
I wish I had. No, I don't. You know that phrase, the hubris of youth? I was so hubris of youth. I was so